we put it to our listeners right before we went to the break about, can the Bills get better or will the Bills get better in free agency this offseason? Certainly they've got to replenish the roster, if nothing else. They got 10 draft picks. They're going to get those guys. You got to think, too, probably in a perfect world, you might even get a handful of contributors out of that draft. But certainly you got to think there's a good chance all 10 of those kids make the roster.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about free agency? Because you go down the list every year, and it's getting worse and worse now because teams are starting to sign guys to a bunch of one-year deals.
Yeah,
so you get these names that pop out after having a pretty good season with whoever they are, like Leonard Floyd for the Bills,
exactly.
for instance. What are your thoughts about free agency and where the Bills might head?
Well, I think obviously the headliner is that the Bills are way over the cap, but it's not going to be that difficult for them to get under the cap. They have to get under it, and I think Brandon Beane has shown over the last couple of seasons with the big Josh Allen contract and some others that he knows how to use accounting practices to get cap compliant and be able to sign guys like Leonard Floyd and bring in a Tim Settle, a Daquan Jones, maybe not a Von Miller-esque signing, but I don't think the Bills necessarily need that splash of a signing. They need those little role players here and there on each side of the ball. The wide receiver group I really like, and I think we saw it last year. Maybe it didn't come to fruition as much as the Bills wanted with Deontay Hardy and Trent Sherfield, but beyond probably drafting a wide receiver in the first or the second round, I think they will be able to check that bargain bin for some free agent wide receivers, and there are some good ones out there.
Right. So let's go down a quick list here about.
We got 5.
We got quick. There you go. Some of your more probably realistic.
Exactly.
Targets, right?
Yes. So this list that I compiled is not. You could say T. Higgins, you could say Mike Evans, but I think they're obviously priced out of where the Bills ultimately will want to spend and can spend in free agency. Just to run through these quickly, starting at the bottom and then going up, and this is in order. So Laviska Shenault is my number one guy in terms of realistic.
Why do you like him?
I like him. He is so good after the catch. He is 6'1", 225. He's built like a fullback almost, and was injured last season in Carolina. 2 separate ankle injuries, so I think that was going to lower his price in free agency. The Bills are not afraid to sign someone after coming off an injury. Deontay Hardy didn't play 2 seasons ago before the Bills signed him. With Shenault, he averaged forcing 17 missed tackles per season in his first 3 years in the NFL. And if you're thinking, is 17 missed forced tackles, is that a lot? That was the same number that Jamar Chase forced last year. So he is someone, and I think Joe Brady wants to utilize the wide receiver screen game. We saw that down the stretch. I don't think Stephon Diggs is really that guy at this point in his career. That's not really his strength. I think the Bills want to use Khalil Shakir in more of a classic slot role next season. So if you bring in Laviska Shenault, and he will be cheap, I'm talking 1 year, $2 million, 1 year, $3 million, somewhere in that range, and that maybe even is a little bit high for him. Yeah. He can be that wide receiver screen guy. Some other names, KJ Osborn on that list, went to the University of Buffalo, has been a pretty steady contributor in Minnesota. Kendrick Bourne is someone I think coming off the ACL tear is not going to get a ton of money. Bills fans know him well. He's actually pretty good in New England the last couple seasons, despite lesser quarterback play. In Mac Jones' rookie season in 2021, he almost had 900 yards receiving. So Kendrick Bourne is someone late 20s. You watched against the Bills, he made some plays. He's a good player that is not going to cost an arm and a leg. And I think you add him with Josh Allen, and suddenly Allen is the type of quarterback that can elevate his game. So those 5 on there can be bargain bin free agents who are better when they're in Buffalo next season.
Tell me a little bit about Olamide Zaccheaus.
So he went to the University of Virginia. He was like the do-everything player in college. And in Atlanta, when he had more of an opportunity than he did this past season in Philadelphia, had over 800 yards just catching the football. So I think he's someone that wasn't a big contributor for the Eagles this past season. We see this touchdown here from Jalen Hurts. That was a big one against the Bills. That was to Zaccheaus. A little bit of a smaller guy, but I like he can play inside or outside. He's not just a slot receiver, has good speed down the field. And again, he was buried on that roster this past season in Philadelphia, but in Atlanta, when he was the bona fide number 2 for the Falcons in 2021, was very productive. So I think he could be someone that's kind of like in that Isaiah McKenzie role, maybe can give you a little bit more than that. But all 5 of those wide receivers, they're not going to, generate a lot of headlines in free agency. But again, when you let Josh Allen throw them the football, then suddenly I think they could be really good in Buffalo. And the one that I haven't mentioned yet, Noah Brown. He had just signed a 1-year deal in Houston this past year. And I think that's important because it shows that he's willing to sign those, 1-year deals just to ultimately get a bigger deal
Try
afterward.
it out deal. Yeah.
Exactly. He averaged over 17 yards per catch this season with C.J. Stroud there with the Texans. Came into the league very young out of Ohio State, was a low-volume guy in Dallas to start his career, but he showed now that he is into his late 20s, the polish and the refinement that is needed to get open, to make catches deep down the field. He showed that this past season in Houston, and he was banged up a little bit. So, again, he's not going to be able to come into free agency and say, look, I played 17 games, I played 800 snaps, I want $6, $7, $8 million a year. Right. He could be a lesser guy that starts and you project him as your wide receiver 3. You have Dalton Kincaid, you have Khalil Shakir kind of splitting that wide receiver 2 role. You draft a receiver. That's what I think Brandon Beane will ultimately do. Find those role players at defensive tackle, at safety, and I think very importantly at wide receiver.
Yeah, one of the things about, and for Bills fans, Kendrick Bourne's a guy who's been playing for the Patriots, so you see him once in a while. In fact, the thing that you'll remember about Kendrick Bourne, you think back to the playoff game 2 years ago when the Bills had the perfect game.
Yeah.
Kendrick Bourne was the lone bright spot in that game in the second half for the New England Patriots. He caught a couple of passes and went deep and then took an end around. He was the only guy that actually showed up and was athletically good enough to do something against the Bills in that game for the Patriots. He's got some juice.
And to that point, he is a rare wide receiver who's big. He's not super fast, but he's a vertical threat because he can make those difficult catches down the field. He's very good in those contested catch situations.